The first time I saw Thomas Chen, he was hanging from a rope 200 meters down a mountainside with approximately 40 seconds before the next avalanche was going to decide whether he lived or died. And I was standing at the cliff edge wondering if my hands were shaking because of the cold or because I was about to watch someone I cared about get buried under an estimated 10,000 tons of snow. My name is Marcus Sullivan. I'm 27 years old, and I work as a mountain rescue coordinator for the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Service. I've been in mountain rescue for 6 years, started as a volunteer on search and rescue teams, got certified in high-angle rescue, and moved into coordination when I understood that managing the rescue was sometimes more important than being the person executing it. I'm good at what I do: spatial awareness, risk assessment, and the specific kind of calm that comes from understanding that panic in a rescue operation kills more people than the actual emergency does. Thomas Chen was not a mountain rescue professional. He was a 29-year-old elite rock climbing guide with 15 years of climbing experience, certified in advanced alpine techniques, and the specific kind of competence that comes from spending half your life attached to vertical rock. He'd been leading a 4-person climbing expedition on Mount Columbia when the avalanche warning went from elevated to extreme in the space of 30 minutes due to a sudden storm system that had moved in faster than the weather models predicted. The problem was that Thomas and his climbing party, 2 clients and 1 assistant guide, were already on the mountain when the avalanche risk escalated. They were approximately 600 meters up the north face, which was technically safe from the particular avalanche paths that fed into the valley, except that the weather system brought wind speeds that exceeded 60 miles per hour and reduced visibility to approximately 10 meters. "We can descend," Thomas had said to me over his satellite communicator at 14:30 on Friday afternoon, his voice steady despite the obvious wind noise. "We're secure in our current location, but descent is still possible. We have approximately 4 hours before conditions become too dangerous to move. What do you need?" I'd asked. "I need someone to tell me the safest descent route given the current weather," Thomas said. "I can navigate in whiteout conditions, but I need ground truth information about which paths are safest given the avalanche risk." I spent the next 2 hours on a satellite phone with Thomas, reviewing topographic maps, analyzing weather data, consulting with avalanche forecasters, and building the safest possible descent route through a mountain that was actively trying to kill us all. Thomas's team made slow progress down the north face, methodical, careful, using fixed ropes where possible and establishing new anchors where necessary. By 16:30, they were approximately 400 meters elevation lower and still making progress. By 17 o'clock, they descended another 100 meters and were approaching the critical traverse zone where they had to cross approximately 200 meters of exposed slope that fed into an active avalanche path. "We're approaching the traverse," Thomas reported. "Visibility is still extremely limited. Wind is sustained at 55 knots with gusts exceeding 70. Current snow conditions appear stable, but I'm concerned about hidden wind slab development." "What's the current avalanche forecast?" "Extreme," I said, reading the latest update. "But the active avalanche paths are concentrated on the east side of the summit. The slope you're traversing is feeding into a path that's considered relatively stable given current conditions. You can cross, but you need to do it quickly. And watch for wind slab indicators." What I didn't tell him, what I was trying not to think about, was that relatively stable and extreme avalanche conditions still meant that an estimated 10% of avalanche crossings in those conditions resulted in slides. It meant that Thomas and his team were betting their lives on the 90% odds that the mountain wouldn't collapse beneath them, but they had to cross to descend safely. Staying on the north face with darkness approaching and wind speeds increasing would be more dangerous than attempting the traverse. "Beginning traverse," Thomas reported at 17:15. "Team is in single file formation, with 50 meters between each member. Client 1 is in the lead, client 2 behind him, assistant guide behind client 2, and I'm establishing anchors at the traverse exit. ETA across is approximately 20 minutes. I listened to the radio as they began their slowest, most careful 20 minutes of the descent. Each step had to be deliberate. Each anchor had to be tested. Each member of the team had to be secure before the next person could move. It was like watching someone try to cross a tightrope made of ice while a hurricane screamed around them. At 17:22, something shifted. The wind picked up again, a gusting acceleration that made the radio static intensify and made my stomach drop. "We have a wind event," Thomas reported, and his voice had changed. Not panicked, but alert, focused. The voice of someone who understands that the mountain is about to do something significant and has maybe seconds to prepare. "Slope is activating. We have slough. Everyone secure positions now." A slough is loose snow sliding down a slope, different from an avalanche, but often a warning sign that an avalanche is coming. It means the snow is being destabilized. It means the bonds between snow layers are breaking down. It means you're running out of time. Marcus, Thomas said, his voice cutting through the wind noise with absolute clarity. "I need you to tell me what's happening to this slope. I need exact conditions. I need you to tell me whether I should direct the team to rest or to prepare for full release. Pull the latest avalanche activity data," I said immediately to my assistant coordinator, Sarah. She was monitoring seismic sensors that detect avalanche activity. The readings on her screen would show if an avalanche was actually happening on any of the instrumented paths. "We're getting seismic activity," Sarah reported. "Eastside paths are running, but nothing on the north face traverse path yet. Slough is normal wind activity," I told Thomas. "Eastside paths are running, but nothing on your line yet. You're still in the stable zone, but wind speeds are extreme. Keep the team in rest positions and monitor for additional slough." Thomas relayed the information to his team. For the next 5 minutes, they held position while loose snow slid down the slope in smaller and smaller waves. Then, slowly, the wind event subsided. "Slope is stabilizing," Thomas reported. "Team is holding position. We can continue traverse when conditions allow." "What's your assessment?" "The east side paths have run," I said. "That should reduce overall avalanche pressure. But your slope is still feeding into an active path. If conditions stabilize for the next 10 minutes, I recommend you continue traverse immediately and get everyone across before the next wind event." "Understood," Thomas said. "Beginning traverse. Edo cross is 15 minutes. Keeping team in secure intervals." What happened in those next 15 minutes was some of the most intense mountain rescue coordination I've ever done. I was monitoring seismic data, tracking wind speeds, analyzing satellite imagery of snow conditions, and maintaining constant radio contact with Thomas while he was leading for people across a slope that could collapse at any moment. By 17:45, Thomas reported that Client 1 had reached the traverse exit. By 17:50, Client 2 had reached it. By 17:55, the assistant guide was moving across the final section. "Almost across," Thomas reported. "Just me left. Approximately 50 meters to traverse exit." "You've got this," I said, and I meant it in a way that transcended professional radio communication. I meant it as a person-to-person, as someone who had just spent 3 hours planning descents with this guy and had developed the specific kind of trust that comes from having someone's life depend on your decisions and having them trust those decisions anyway. Thomas was approximately 30 meters from the traverse exit when the mountain decided it had had enough of the day. The seismic sensors registered a spike. Sarah's screens lit up with readings indicating a major avalanche event. Wind speeds on the summit jumped to 75 knots. And then, cutting through the radio static, I heard Thomas say one word that made my heart stop. "Deploying." A climbing rope deployment is exactly what it sounds like: anchoring yourself to the slope and using your body weight and equipment to try to rest a slide. It's what you do when an avalanche starts beneath you and you have maybe 3 seconds to decide between trying to stay attached to the slope or being carried down it. "Thomas," I shouted into the radio, knowing he couldn't hear me over the roar of the avalanche. "Thomas, respond." Static. Just wind and static and the sound of tons of snow moving at high velocity. "Marcus," Sarah said quietly, and her voice had the specific tone of someone who's just realized we might be coordinating a body recovery instead of a rescue. "Seismic readings indicate a major slide. Approximately 300 meters of slope face has released." I'm not getting deployment confirmation from Thomas's satellite communicator. I stood at the cliff edge, looking down into the whiteout, unable to see anything. Unable to see if Thomas had managed to rest himself on the slope. Unable to see if he was still alive. "Get emergency services mobilized," I said to Sarah. Full SAR activation. We're going to have avalanche debris field, zero visibility, and someone who's either safe on the slope or buried under approximately 10,000 tons of snow. I want rescue teams staging at the valley base within 30 minutes. Already on it, Sarah said. First teams are rolling now. For the next 11 minutes, I heard nothing from Thomas. Nothing but wind and static and the sound of my own breathing and the desperate hope that someone could survive an avalanche deployment in those conditions. Then, Marcus. Still here. Deployed successfully. Held position through primary slide. Secondary slough activity is decreasing. I'm stable on the slope, approximately 80 meters below traverse exit, fully anchored, with rope secured to client 1's position above. Avalanche debris field is massive but above my current position. I'm safe. I realized I'd been holding my breath. I released it in a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. Say again. I said, because I needed to make sure I'd heard him correctly. I'm safe, Thomas repeated. Deployment worked. Rope held. I'm anchored to the slope and fully secure. I'm going to wait here until avalanche danger decreases and rescue teams can assist with evacuation. Or I can attempt to climb back up to the traverse exit and rejoin client 1's position if you believe conditions will allow it. Stay where you are, I said immediately. Full SAR is activated. We have rescue helicopters staging. Conditions are too dangerous for climbing movement. You're safer anchored where you are than moving in these conditions. Rescue teams will extract you from your current position. At approximately 40 minutes. Copy that, Thomas said. I'm stable. I can wait. Client 1, Client 2, and Assistant Guide are all secure above the traverse exit. Everyone is alive. Everyone is okay. The next 40 minutes were simultaneous chaos and precision. Helicopter teams staged at the valley base and waited for conditions to stabilize enough for flight operations. Ground rescue teams began movement toward the avalanche debris field. I maintained continuous communication with Thomas, monitoring his safety and tracking the rescue team's progress. At 1840, conditions had improved enough for helicopter operations. The first SAR helicopter launched from the valley, flown by a pilot named Derek Chen, not related to Thomas. As far as I knew, who trained specifically for high-altitude rescue operations in whiteout conditions. We have visual on the mountain, Derek reported as the helicopter approached. Visibility is approximately 200 meters due to lower cloud cover. We're attempting to locate the avalanche debris field and rescue position. Subject is anchored to the slope approximately 80 meters below the traverse exit, I reported. He's secured with rope attachment to client 1's position above. He's stable and awaiting extraction. Asterisk. The helicopter maneuvered through wind shear and reduced visibility with the kind of precision that suggested Derek had done this approximately 1 million times and was completely unfazed by the impossibility of it. At 1847, Derek reported visual confirmation of Thomas's position. I have the subject in visual contact, Derek confirmed. He's anchored to the slope, fully secure, and appears to be in good condition. We're going to attempt rope extraction. Lowering rescue swimmer. What happened in the next 8 minutes was a rescue operation that shouldn't have been possible under those conditions. A rescue swimmer in full gear descended on a rope from a helicopter that was fighting wind shear while hovering 200 feet above a slope that had just released an avalanche. The swimmer reached Thomas, confirmed that he was secure and capable of being extracted, attached him to the rescue line, and the helicopter lifted him out of the whiteout back toward the valley. By 19 o'clock Friday evening, Thomas was on the ground, being evaluated by medical personnel, and very much alive despite having just survived an avalanche deployment that had statistically close odds of killing him. I didn't meet Thomas in person until the next morning. The evening of the rescue had been consumed by incident documentation, rescue team debriefing, and the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from making decisions that determine whether people live or die. But at 8 o'clock Saturday morning, I walked into the emergency medical clinic where Thomas was being kept for observation. No injuries beyond bruising and exhaustion, the doctor said, which was impossible odds given what he'd experienced. But apparently Thomas Chen was apparently lucky. In addition to being competent, he was sitting up in a medical bed wearing a hospital gown, looking extremely frustrated. When I walked in, "I want to leave," he said immediately. "I have no injuries. I'm wasting medical resources. I need to debrief with my clients and then I need to start planning the next expedition because you're insane, I interrupted. You just survived an avalanche deployment. You can stay in a hospital bed for 24 hours. I've survived 14 avalanche deployments, Thomas said. This isn't even statistically unusual for my career. 14, I said. That's either extremely impressive or extremely concerning. I haven't decided which yet. He smiled. Actually smiled, despite the medical exhaustion and the fact that he'd spent the previous afternoon deployed to an avalanche slope. It's both, he said. Usually the impressive and concerning parts are the same thing when you're a climbing guide. I sat down in the chair next to his bed. I've been coordinating your rescue from the mountain for the last 18 hours, I said. During which time I realized something. You're terrifyingly competent at staying alive in conditions that should kill you. And I'm going to develop an ulcer if I ever have to coordinate another rescue with you because the stakes will always be that high. You could not coordinate my rescues, Thomas suggested. You could let someone else do it.
No, I said. I could not do that. Because you'd be more likely to die if I wasn't paying attention to every detail of your descent. Thomas was quiet for a moment. I know, he said finally. I noticed that during the traverse, the way you were giving me information, the way you were tracking conditions, the way you were staying on the radio with me, even when I wasn't asking for direct communication. I realized that I was safer because you were coordinating my descent. That's not something I usually trust about other people. And now? I asked. Now I trust you completely, he said, which is either the best thing that's ever happened to my survival rate or the worst thing that's happened to my independence. It's probably both, I said. He reached out and took my hand. No hesitation, no uncertainty. Just recognition that something significant had happened between us during those hours on the mountain. What happened over the next 6 months was the work of building something real from the crisis-bonded foundation we'd already created. Thomas had to go back to climbing. It was his career, his passion, his reason for being alive. But now he had someone coordinating his mountain work who understood the risks in intimate detail because I'd calculated them personally. And I had someone who understood mountain environments in ways that made my job easier because he lived in them. We started with debriefing conversations that extended past professional necessity. Continued with me attending Thomas's climbing training sessions and understanding exactly what kind of work he did, managing risk, reading environments, making split-second decisions about safety when climbing conditions change rapidly. You're going to give yourself a nervous breakdown, Thomas said once, watching me monitor avalanche forecasts for every mountain he was going to climb. You can't control the mountain. You can only respond to what it does. I know that intellectually, I said, but watching you put your life at risk, even when I trust your competence absolutely, makes me want to stack the deck in your favor however I can. That's love, Thomas said simply. Love is trying to stack the deck even when you know the deck can't be controlled. By month 3, we were living together. By month 4, we'd integrated our lives completely. My work coordinating rescue operations, his work climbing mountains, both of us understanding that the other person's job was essential and non-negotiable. At month 6, Thomas invited me to climb with him on a peak that was considered extreme, but not avalanche-prone, a rock climbing route, not a snow-exposed alpine climb. I trained for months and made it to the summit alongside him, and somewhere near 14,000 feet, with the entire San Juan Range visible around us, Thomas asked me to marry him. Will you? He asked, simple and direct and completely Thomas. Yes, I said. With the full understanding that you're going to keep climbing mountains, and I'm going to keep coordinating your rescues, and this is going to be complicated and occasionally terrifying. That's the deal, Thomas agreed. Complicated love, built from understanding that some things are worth risking everything for. Epilogue, 1 year later. We're hiking in the Maroon Bells on a September weekend, 1 year after the avalanche that changed everything. It's a non-technical hike, which means Thomas can stop thinking like a professional climber and just walk. I can stop thinking like a rescue coordinator and just enjoy a mountain that's not actively trying to kill anyone. I've been thinking about something, Thomas says as we're sitting on a rocky outcrop overlooking Castle Creek Valley. I want to start teaching avalanche rescue operations, not just climbing guides, but actual SAR coordinators. I want to teach people how to think like a climber when they're doing mountain rescue. That's brilliant, I say, and incredibly dangerous, because you'll be teaching people to take more risks. I'll be teaching people to understand risk, Thomas corrects. I'll be teaching SAR coordinators like you to understand what climbers experience so you can coordinate rescues better. I'll be teaching climbers to understand what rescue coordinators need so they can communicate more effectively. That's actually excellent, I admit. You'd be very good at it. I know, Thomas says, but I can only do it if you're going to be coordinating those training operations, because I trust you to manage risk in ways that keep me sane while I'm teaching other people to be brave. That's incredibly manipulative, I say. That's incredibly accurate, Thomas says. I'm asking you to marry me again, specifically so you'll agree to coordinate my teaching operations. I'm already married to you. I know, but I'm still going to ask you every time I want you to do something important, Thomas says. That's just how this relationship works. I kiss him there on the rocky outcrop, 1 year after I almost watched him die on an avalanche slope. And it's perfect in the way that survival is perfect, not flashy or dramatic, but solid and real, and earned through trust built in the worst conditions and chosen to continue in the best ones. The cardinal rule of mountain rescue is that you understand the mountain will always be more powerful than human will. But the better rule, the one they don't teach in training, is that when you find someone who understands that danger as intimately as you do, you hold onto them with both hands and never let go. I'm holding on with both hands. Thomas is holding on with both hands. And somehow, in the middle of one of the most dangerous jobs on Earth, we found something that feels completely safe.